All right, everybody. How you doing? It's News Debate. I am Lee. Great to have you here in traditional, typic show fashion, starting the show late. Oh, yes. Live over on stereo, live over on Twitter Spaces, also sending video to Rumble and Twitch. All those links at bit.ly slash NEWZ debate. That's bit.ly slash NEWZ debates. Joined right now over on over on Twitter by patreon.com slash NEWZ debate supporter. Friend of the show, apostate Nate. Nate, I muted your mic because I could hear you in the background, but you should be able to unmute yourself. How you doing?
I didn't know the mic was on. Goodly. I I'm guessing the topic for today is going to be gun control at some point. What do you think? You're the host.
Yeah, I didn't choose that one because, to be honest, it's not the worst shooting as of late. But we can definitely talk about what happened to yet another religious organization. Um, Shooter walked in. I believe two children have died. Very sad, but with so many others out there, I think you really do have to start comparing these by the numbers. And this one, fortunately, is rather low. I have a couple of other stories picked out, but we can begin with gun control if you'd like. It's up to you. Anybody over on stereo, leave a voice message or request to speak over on Twitter Spaces. You pick the topics. What do you think, Nate? All right, we're having awesome Elon Musk Twitter problems. So Paste Nate was a speaker. I saw he dropped down to a listener and then he left and just came back, which is the usual. This is how we fix this problem. Let me see if I can make you a speaker again. And if not, I will reset Twitter Spaces, as that sometimes can help as well. All right. Seems to be working. Let me reset maybe though. All right. Yes, we're back over on Twitter Spaces. Let's make Nate a speaker again. Come on, Twitter Spaces. Hey, Nate, you're back. All right, we got you back.
Can you hear me this time? I feel like
Yes, yes. I
Ethan.
think the gun control lobby took you out, or rather, the gun rights lobby. The gun control lobby probably wants to hear what you have to say. Okay, so do you want to talk about guns? Should I bring up this story?
If we don't get there now, we're going to get there at some point, Lee. It is your show.
But it's driven by fine people like Apostate Nate, other supporters over on patreon.com slash NEWZ debate. And hey, you don't have to pay to play on this show. You can also request to speak on Twitter Spaces, leave a voice message on stereo absolutely for free. But I do want to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters like Apostate Nate, Better Vibes, Lola, Shannon, Sneaky Elbow, Ron, MC Funk, Bjorn, and hopefully you over on patreon.com slash NEWZ debate. Nate, why don't you give me your thoughts on the latest shooting in the United States, and then I'll bring up like a CNN article or something.
I think the question that I would have for those who question, that's a bad way of putting it. For those who are linking uh, being trans with also being physically violent, and physically violent with a deadly weapon at that, um, I have a feeling that this story is going to be sort of used to used, weaponized, mobilized against a very, very small percent of the population. And I think the question I have for myself is, what does the data say per capita? Is this true? Um, because the narrative has gone there, went there immediately, instantly. At least it did on my Twitter wall.
Well, that's an interesting idea. While I bring up a story, let's jump on that really quickly because I guess we have multiple trans shooters now, and that's clearly a low percentage of all trans people. But when you think about gun rights, I mean, the people who go and use a gun in a mass shooting is also a very low percentage of people. And yet people want to tighten gun laws. So if mass shootings can be used to say we need to redo our thinking on guns in the United States, why can't someone else also cherry pick and say, well, we have a lot of this going on now. Maybe that's an issue. You're muted upon state name.
Just 1 second, Lee. I'm tied up for just a minute. Sorry.
Being attacked by the gun rights lobby once again. They couldn't silence you on Twitter Spaces because I was able to reset it. And now they're going at you personally. All right, let me bring this up from NBC News if my ad blocker is going to work. Looks like it does. But we got an annoying video pop up. Here we go. Okay. I'll share this over on Twitch and Rumble. Mass was underway Wednesday morning to mark the beginning of the academic school year at the Annunciation Catholic School when bullets started flying through the stained glass. That shooting, which killed 2 students and wounded nearly 24 other people. So I guess we lucked out here. I mean, if 24 other people were hit by rounds and only 2 died, that's pretty good odds. It occurred as Mass was being celebrated, and it's something that Reverend Dennis Zarin is still struggling to process. It's something I will never be able to unsee, he says. Zarin, who was leading Mass on Wednesday at Annunciation Catholic Church, recalled rushing toward the sound of bullets, hopeful that he could help some way. Yeah, that's an interesting choice, but okay, courageous guy. The Reverend pastor at the Annunciation Catholic Church is going to be affected for the rest of his lives, just like everybody else that survived that. An 8-year-old and a 10-year-old were killed. At least 15 other children ages 6 to 15 were injured alongside 3 adult parishioners. 6 people remained hospitalized Friday, including a child in serious, rather critical condition, as well as an adult in serious condition. But police say all wounded victims are expected to survive. The suspect died of a self inflicted gunshot wound. The acting U.S. attorney for the District of Minnesota says the suspect was full of hate and was obsessed with the idea of killing children. On Saturday evening, students and parishioners eager to pray and mourn together gathered for the first service since the attack. It was held in the parish's auditorium, a separate campus building from where the shooting occurred. Good move. Good move. That's always a hard thing, trying to figure out what to do with the buildings where school shootings happen, where mass shootings happen. Sometimes they demolish them, sometimes they give it some time, obviously clean it up, maybe even redo it a bit, and then decide to reuse it. You can find examples of both. The pastor wept as he recalled the congregation being told to stay down because rounds were ringing out from what police have described as a semi-automatic rifle. The archbishop for that area hoped that returning to Mass after the shooting would help the church's parishioners and children reclaim a sense of normality. Now, this is interesting. These are accounts of people attending the Mass with their young children. I can't say I agree with that. Go ahead and leave the kiddies at home for a while. I know it sends like maybe a strong message of resilience, but with copycats and everything else, I'm not saying don't bring kids to church services across the country, but for now, with this specific congregation, I don't think it's a terrible idea to just say leave them at home. Hey, Bjorn's joining us over here on stereo. Let's get Bjorn up. All right, Bjorn, how you doing? We kicked off with yet another gun discussion, gun rights versus Jesus save our children and everybody else. You can jump on that. We can move somewhere else. Apostate Nate introduced this topic, and I think he might be a bit busy now. He told us to give us a moment, but whatever the case, how you doing? It's been a while.
Good, good. Yeah, it's been a fun weekend. Today I am making a cheesecake from scratch. So I've never done that before. So it was a fun adventure so far.
And what does from scratch mean?
It means like you start with the base ingredients and you don't use a box. So like you measure shit and like put it in a bowl and mix it up instead of like buying a boxed thing. Because there is like Jello cheesecake you can make, which is just literally like a powder and you mix it up and it just like no bake and it tastes good. I'm not going to say it doesn't taste good, but it's not the same as like getting the cream cheese and creaming it, putting all the sugar and eggs, blah blah blah. It's a bit of a process.
So, what's the most pre-made ingredient that you use if you say I'm making something from scratch? In this case, a cheesecake.
I mean, I didn't create my own cream cheese, so I purchased the cream cheese. It's probably the most pre-made ingredient. So yeah, this is. I mean, it's pretty simple ingredients, just like cheesecake, sugar. Excuse me, cream cheese, sour cream, sugar, eggs, brown sugar. You blend it all up. I guess one of the ingredients is graham cracker crust. So you take the graham cracker and you squash it up, and then you put some butter in it, make the crust. So I guess that's a little bit pre-made. But I did not bake my own graham crackers and then crush them up. Hopefully, I don't lose any street cred for that.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. You got to start somewhere. So, how long does this process take?
Well, I did it with the kids, so we Montessori'd it. So I took it a little slow, and we measured out all the things and made them do math about fractions and all the things that you do, and made her read the recipe. And we gathered all the ingredients, so it went a lot slower. It took me probably an hour to do everything with the kids, and then it was about an hour baking, and now it has to cool for 2 hours on the stove because cheesecakes, like if you cool them too quickly, they'll like crack, and so you like have to like do things to try to make them cool a little slower. So it's sitting on top of the warm oven. It has to sit there for 2 hours,
Our mothers.
and then you put it in the oven for 6 hours. So
Apologies, we had an interruption by fake Donald Trump, who's going to make an appearance here in a bit. I want to talk to him about gun rights. Clearly, he probably has an answer we're all expecting. Okay, so thank you for the pleasantry there, Bjorn. Apostate Nate, let me know if you can jump back in because you started all this. But yes, there's been yet another shooting. I think an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old were killed. It was in Minneapolis, and something like 24 people were wounded. I just read before you joined the show that they've had their first church service in a different building but same congregation since the shooting. And several people were quoted saying they brought their very young children, the same ages of the children who were killed just a handful of days ago. So, what do you think about all this? We've talked about this on the show before. You clearly, as well as myself, would love some more restrictions on guns in the United States. But what are your thoughts with this most recent attack?
Where was this happen? I didn't hear it about this one. Where did this occur?
Yeah, see, that was I started the show and I was looking forward to talking about a few different subjects, and I didn't even have this one picked because only 2 children died. I know that sounds terrible, but when it comes to a mass shooting in the United States, that's actually, wow, that couldn't have been that wasn't as bad as it could have been. So, this is ABC News. I have this up on Rumble and Twitch. Police have identified the suspect, who they say opened fire outside of a church at a Catholic school in Minneapolis, killing 2 children and injuring, this says, 18 others. The article I just read that is more updated says about 24. And the killer is identified as a 23-year-old. An 8-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl were shot and killed when the gunman fired through the windows of a church at the Annunciation Catholic School on Wednesday morning. The shooter died at the scene from self-inflicted gunshot wounds, according to police. A name change application for a minor born on the same dates as this person, who apparently was responsible for this, was approved by a district court in Minnesota in 2020, changing the name from Robert to Robin, explaining the minor child identifies as a female and wants her name to reflect that identification. So, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I think this is cherry picking, and there's certainly more than the handful of trans mass shooters that have been in the news the last couple of years. But here's yet another notch to a trans person taking a gun and trying to kill as many people as they're able to. Officials say they're looking through information left behind to try to determine some type of motive. In the previous article I read, that some figure said that the shooter hated children and was fascinated with killing children, and that's why they chose the church school that had clearly children inside. The authorities do not believe the suspect had any previous arrests or civil commitments for mental health issues. Yes, Bjorn, I want to throw it back to you. Those are some details, and I think Apostate Nate may have joined us again over on Twitter Spaces.
Yeah, I did hear about that one. And I don't know, I think, we first start by saying this is like a terrible person. I think that's, when we talk about blame, clearly there's some systemic problems, with guns in this country, but the blame lands solidly in that person's lap. If this is a 17-year-old or whatever you said, just like a terrible garbage human. I'm sorry. For someone to feel like they need to be get their 15 minutes of fame by murdering children, or just freaking, sitting in a church about to go to school. It is just an awful, terrible thing. And I think, listening to that story just turns my stomach. Just all I feel is disgust towards that person. And it's really, really terrible. And I don't know. I think personally, I have been I'm more affected emotionally by these stories now that I have my own children. And I'm just it's traumatic almost to imagine your own kids being in that situation, and just terrifying, absolutely terrifying. Currently, here's an interesting piece of fact that we can talk about. I just actually transferred my kids from public school to private school. And at our private school, they have armed guards.
You absolute monster, taking money away from public schools. Monster.
Yeah, I definitely, it hurt me a little bit in my, liberal bones to go to private school. Because, I'm a product of public education is kind of like what I was always going for. But interestingly, Oregon is something like 47th in like the educational, um, rankings on some things if you look it up. And so like our
Really,
education system is
liberal
not great
Oregon
here,
is like almost dead last in education.
right? And surprising to me too. And it's like, speaks a little bit to like, and I don't think we are dead last for like per capita charges per student. So like in terms of money, I think that we have a lot of money, but it's poorly managed, and results in not amazing education. So this is a great example for the Republicans to like point to and show how not an increased amount of money. And maybe I'm wrong about, I actually don't know where we rank in terms of like money spent on students, but I have the sense that we spend plenty, but we just don't have very good results.
As a father of, I believe, two young children, younger than the children killed at this church Catholic school shooting, 8 and 10. Do you have any sense of why that money isn't effective, just anecdotally in your own life, in your children's lives? Do you see inefficiency? Do they not have, I'll use a stereotypical question. Is liberal Oregon not aligning its priorities with education and aligning its priorities more with everyone can use bathrooms? I'm just making this up just to give you an idea of the sort of question I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good sense of it. The goblins are about to come in the door, so it's going to get loud. I think, from my perspective, it's a couple things. One, like, I'll just give you an example of something that's kind of frustrating. So my district where I live in, or the school where I live in, is in a little bit more affluent neighborhood. There's lots of Nike and Nike people and like Intel engineers in this area. So like in terms of other school systems, it's fairly affluent. But interestingly, Portland has a thing where they shift money away from more affluent districts and send it to places that have in the
Here it
city that
comes.
have less funding.
Here it comes. Yeah. Mm.
So like we actually get less funding per capita than some of the other schools, and so oftentimes we end up making up that difference by doing like fundraisers. So we do a lot of fundraisers, and then even a portion of that money we fundraise, a portion of that also gets sent to other schools. So even though we're raising it out of our own money, that also
Jesus.
like,
Oh man, Bjorn, your liberalness must just be like shredding away. Like, I mean, it's just like you see the problems with that, right?
yeah, totally. And like, it just, um, and I don't know. It's been pretty rough. And our school specifically, our school was chosen because it was like a very high ranked, you know, grade school to like be like this pilot project for like kids who had like special needs and like emotional dysregulation. But the problem is when they brought the kids there, they didn't fully fund it. And so like the kids who were there were kind of concentrated at our school from all over the district. And what resulted was like a ton of kids were getting like bullied and beat up and like kind of attacked, and like there's lots of like, cursing and sexual innuendos and all these other things that like just was not like fully, they kind of conceived this program, put it into place, but then like the para educators that they would say that were going to be there were not fully funded. And we actually met with the paras and said, what's going on? And they said, well, they promised us like 8 paras and they ended up giving us like 3. And so like it's always been super underfunded. And but the results of it was like a very high performing school kind of has gone way down in terms of lots of problems. The parents are like complaining their kids are getting beat up and bullied every day. The kids even got like, attacked. And so it's like we just had to bail. So, and I mean, I think that, from one stand, I applaud and like appreciate, I think, what they're trying to do, but it was just like really poorly rolled out. And, these are like very formative years. And so I have the ability to like take them out of this situation where, clearly other people don't. I guess I'm just not willing to like wait on this experiment while my kids are going there and actively being armed or whatever. So it's kind of a tough decision, but at the same time, our new school is great and it's really great.
So, I mean, you're progressive to the core. So, this must have been a long, drawn out decision for you to remove your kids from public school and then send them to private school. Were you able to get any cash? Were you able to use a voucher system or anything like that? I would just guess Oregon
No,
doesn't have that.
no, there's no voucher. There's no vouching. So I'm paying, all my taxes are going to public school and I'm paying for private school, fortunately.
Well, yeah, I mean, your taxes are kind of going to the school your kids used to go to, but it's also going to other schools. And when you were raising money, a lot of that money was also going to other schools. So, we started talking about this because we're talking about the, very unfortunate, but hey, glass is half full. Only 2 children were killed at the latest school shooting that took place at a Catholic school in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, has this experience changed your view of education? Have you moved more to the right because you've decided to pull your kids out of public school and you're still paying for that public school?
I mean, I guess a little bit. I mean, I think, I think what you always talk of like ideology versus pragmatism. I mean, I still support ideologically, I guess, the, you know, private, public school as a concept and that we should support it. But pragmatically, in my situation, it just was like, I don't think, I mean, it wasn't like our kids are being like tortured or like stabbed or anything like that. And it was fine, but it was just kind of fine. It was meh. And I think I was the one that was dragging our feet out of me and my wife. My wife was like, probably a year and a half ago was like, let's bounce. And I'm like, let's hang in there. It's fine. It's fine. And so I was definitely the dragger of the feet until I was toured. When I toured the private school, that's what really sold it for me. I was like, all right, you've convinced me. You can have my money and my children.
So if you could wave a wand, you would probably undo what Oregon has done. You would say, I'm sorry that other people are in a worse situation than myself, but I'm paying for a public school that my children cannot use. So let's stop sending kids here that don't belong here, even if we're trying to help them, and or let's keep sending them to this school, but let's actually pay them with the money that we have because we live in a nice neighborhood. And all of the money that we have through taxes and all of the money that we raise should go to our kids' school district. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of like, again, this is, I don't know what the term is, but like, this is part of the core of, young couple gentrification is that, people who have monetary means are going to move to places with good school districts and move out of places with bad school districts, and people, move to protect their kids. And I understand that, and we picked this neighborhood specifically because of that public school, and it had very high ratings, and that was one of our driving forces for picking our house. Because we were, on if you ever go on Redfin to buy a house, it has these little things you can see. Boop, here's the school, and what's just like the ratings of the school, and like if they were in a neighborhood that had bad schools, regardless of how good the house was, we're like, nope, we're not going there because we want to have good schools of where we're going to go. So yeah, I mean, it's driven a lot of our big financial decisions and picking a house and everything else now. And like in retrospect, maybe we would have picked a different house if we would have, decided we were going to do private before this. So, yeah, I mean, it's all those things that's, hindsight is 2020. But it's hard to say. I mean, I think, I think it's fair to fund schools with local property taxes, like a lot of things do, and it makes sense for that. But it also is unfair, for struggling schools in a way to have their schools just go way downhill just because of the property taxes in the houses that they're in. And so I don't think I'm necessarily philosophically opposed to the money shifting over there. But at the same time, I've seen the effects on my school of that. And so it's kind of a little bit of a mixed thing where I'm still like struggling to figure out where I am on that. At the end of the day, though, I did necessarily appreciate, especially the raising of the private funds, and those funds also going to other schools was also a little bit of a tough pill to swallow.
Do you understand now why Joe Biden is racist and he was against busing? I don't know if I need a reply to that one. I just remember Kamala Harris calling him basically a racist on national television because he didn't want parents to have to bus their kids. I mean, forget just how long that took, but to go to less good schools. I mean, clearly less good schools than their taxes were paying for. And then all of a sudden, Kamala Harris just kind of forgot that Joe Biden was a racist and she became his running mate, and then screwed us all over when she tried to become president herself. So, final question on this, Bjorn, and then we can talk more about guns or we can move off. You posted a great picture of this homemade cheesecake on my Discord server. Join Discord, go to bit.ly/NEWZ debate. I'm going to pull this cake picture up on Rumble and Twitch here in a bit, and we can break it down. But since you said your wife wanted to pull your kids out like a year ago, and then you were like, hey, let's weather the storm here, honey. And then eventually you toured the private school and said, no, our kids belong here. And I congratulate you on making the right choice. I think from everything you've told me, that's the right choice. As long as you can afford it and make it work, it's important to send your kids somewhere where they're going to be taken care of, be safe, and receive the educational experience they need to succeed later on in life. Though, to be fair, I feel like they're getting a lot of that at home with you and your wife. Did they have friends? Did they have kids in their class that just stopped coming? The new Weapons movie is where like every kid except one in some class doesn't show up one day, and then they're like, "Oh my god, what happened?" So it's not a horror movie, but were your kids seeing the attrition? Were you noticing kids were leaving the school before you pulled your kids out?
Yes, there's more of a slow trickle out. I wouldn't say it was everyone, but there's definitely been like a little bit of flight out. What was interesting about this whole thing was the school didn't tell us about this special program that they had instituted until 18 months in. We found out about it because the parents had been like basically like talking to the school and like meeting with a brick wall and all these things, and they kept just talking about, oh, it's privacy, we can't tell you about students, can't tell you what's going on. There's like, so it's kind of like this weird double standard where they had privacy for the students who were having issues, but they wouldn't really like tell us, the parents of other kids who were like being victimized by other students, like what was going on. We eventually found out about this program that had been kind of pulled into our school, but it wasn't told to us because the parents basically all banded together. We started meeting outside of school about like what can we do to like change what's happening in the school, and this is kind of when we found out about this other thing. And so it was also like hidden from us that this was even happening. And so, and when we, confronted the principal, she basically like stonewalled us and didn't like tell us any of this information. On top of that, also like insulted us in that her response is like, the reason you all are mad is because of the cars in your driveway. Meaning you guys are just a bunch of rich people. That's
why you rich people wanting your kids to go to a good school makes me sick. Damn, Bjorn, I'm glad I asked that question. I had no idea. That's absolutely terrible. So on top of the fact that you now are, I'm being a little playful here, 4 vouchers and you want to abandon public school because your money is going towards other neighborhoods, you're also for another Republican strong tenet nowadays that schools need to tell you everything that affects your kids, including if they choose a different name, if they have a different gender identity, because you were denied that this was something very different, but you were denied information that absolutely affected your students, your children who are students in the public school. Have you changed at all, or do you have a little bit of a different bit of a perspective on parents who want absolutely every piece of information about their kids, including if they have a different name at school and a different identity than they do at home?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely important that like schools are communicating, what's going on with your kids, for sure. I mean, and I think there's also just a difference in terms of like the transition from this public school to the private schools. Like it's amazing how like I mean, I guess we're paying them or whatever, but so it's like they're bending over like backwards to like tell you all these things, and like they have these little apps, and so they tell you like here's a picture of your kid here. They send us pictures throughout the day about what's going on with the kids.
Yeah, I have friends whose kids are in preschool, daycare, and they get pictures and updates throughout the day. So it's like that.
Yeah, we get that, and then like they also like at the end of each week they send us a newsletter about what things they worked on that week, and then like what the next week is going to look like, and so it's like incredibly organized. And I mean, what's weird is like like even just like one of the things that was just like, wow, this is great, was they have an art teacher. And like in the public school, like art has been defunded. There's no funding. There's no funding for art. And so like my art teacher was actually my wife. So she, after work or whatever she would volunteer the school, and she would do art projects with the students at the public school, because the teacher.
But then they said, "Excuse me, Mrs. Bjorn, you can only volunteer here 25% of the day, and then we're going to send you to a couple other school districts in need."
Exactly. So like, I'm just like, wow, you have a dedicated art room and a dedicated art teacher. It doesn't have to be my wife volunteering to do art anymore. I mean, it's a little thing, but it's just like those sort of little things that are, and they also have a technology room with like a 3D printer, and like, it's just, you can see that the money that you're spending is actually given back to the kids. And I don't know, who knows? I mean, it's definitely been a tough transition, and I hope we're gonna see how it goes finance wise. I still got student loans I'm paying off, so it's like we're not like billionaires, so it's not going to be easy for us. But I think it's a sacrifice we're gonna have to make. Less Amazon, right? Less Starbucks.
Yeah, less Amazon, less Starbucks, more art, more Billy and Cindy Times. What would be a great name for the newsletter that they send you? Like the Billy and Cindy Gazette. Yeah, that's it. The Billy and Cindy Gazette weekly delivery. Final question, and then it looks like Apostate Nate has joined us again over on Twitter Spaces. Elon Musk is being a bad man today in Twitter Spaces. We've had to reset it a few times, but I think it's working now. Can you give us, as much as you're comfortable giving, just a general ballpark of, if I sent one kid to this private school, what are we looking at here? Because there's so much of a range, and I don't live in Oregon. I don't live where you live in Oregon, so really I have no idea.
I think it's like $30K.
Is that per child?
Yeah.
So with two kids going to a private school, that's like a pretty decent person's income.
Yeah, it's a lot. So not very excited about it, but another reason I was dragging my feet, but we're going to try to make it work. We'll see how it goes.
Well, I think that principle won in the end, because you're going to have to trade in your car. You're going to be driving some sort of used vehicle, and then she's going to go by and be like, "Ooh, what a sensible choice from the Bjorn family." Wow. Stay with us. This is fascinating. I appreciate the personal touch. Bjorn is a guy who is beloved here on the show, supports us over on patreon.com/NEWZ debate. And I had no idea this had happened, and it just ties right into our discussion we were having previously about the recent school shooting at a Catholic school in Minneapolis. Luckily, of course, that didn't happen to Bjorn's family, but we got on the topic of education, and then this nugget just popped up. Apostate Nate, I think you're back with us over on Twitter Spaces. What a story. Can you jump in? Do you have anything to add? We have a couple messages over on stereo I'd like to get to as well, but all in due time.
Actually, Lee, at the moment, I don't. Proceed to your messages, and I'll try to get a train of thought going here.
Let me know what you think about private versus public education, just in general, vouchers, that sort of a thing, because for the longest time, I thought those were a bad idea. And I still understand why they have negative consequences, especially for people who stay in public schools. But for many years now, both through reading and just anecdotes with friends and family, I have been on the side of vouchers. I think vouchers absolutely should be a thing across the country. I think you should be able to use them to send your kids to religious schools, charter schools, whatever kind of school is legal. I know some charter schools, like, they have exceptions on teacher trainings and things like that. But let's just say, for the sake of an argument, private schools really expensive and they have legitimate teachers. You should be able to use what's due to you as an American, as a parent, to send your kid there. And if there's extra money on top of that, you got to take care of it. But whatever that voucher is worth, and I think that voucher should be worth what the public school is getting, I'm absolutely for that. So maybe think about that for a second, Apostate Nate. Let's jump over to stereo and hear from Dave.
Hey, how's it going, Lee? How's it going, Bjorn? Yeah, the Minnesota shooting, right? This was the trans shooter. I saw a video that he had posted, I believe, on TikTok, where he had all of his clips laid out with messages that he had written on the clips, messages he had written on multiple guns, clearly completely unhinged, planning it out and laughing about it the day beforehand, talking about what he was going to do tomorrow. So I think the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about is which medications, what's the common denominator? What medications are these shooters on? Was this kid on a combination of SSRIs and transitioning hormones? I think that's what really needs to be looked at, because there's many countries that have more guns than we do, and they do not have the gun violence that we do. So clearly, it's not the guns.
Dave, thank you so much for the message. I appreciate that. We have another one coming from you. I just want to correct something there at the end. That's not true, what you just said. It clearly is the guns. So you can talk about total guns, but when it comes to per capita guns in the world, when you look at advanced nations, so I'm not talking about a Venezuela comparison or something like that. When you look at advanced nations, because that's how you have to compare this, we have more guns than people, and we have the most guns per capita of any advanced nation. And even when you throw in non-advanced nations, developing nations, we're still very high up at the top. Canada has more guns than people. They have less guns per capita than we do, but they still have more guns than people. They do not have the per capita violence that we have. So it is clearly the guns. Now, mental health is absolutely a part of this, but it's not like mental health is not an issue other places. It absolutely is, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse for children. They still don't have the per capita gun violence that we have. Now, every other advanced nation has a national health care system, so that's an issue that you should be talking about, rather than, oh, it's not the guns. I really appreciate your demeanor. You seem like a nice guy, but you're just dead wrong. To use a correct phrase here, dead wrong. The data backs it up. It's absolutely not true the way that you laid it out. In fact, we've talked on the show previously many times about how not only does the United States have all of this gun violence per capita, and we have more guns than people, we have the most guns per capita in the developed world. If you look state to state, the states that have stronger gun restrictions, what would you know? They have less gun violence. That's gun violence in general, and that also includes gun suicides, because more than half of gun deaths are suicides, but there's less of them per capita in states that have stronger gun restrictions. So this is what really confuses me. If you're going to look at a bunch of things that are connected to this, why not choose the obvious one that's going to do the most good? It is the guns. And we actually could do something about that in the United States. Mental health, arguably, I'm not sure there's much we can do about that without national health care and a for-profit health industry that's different than any other health industry in any other industrialized first world nation, developed nation. So we can talk about other things and we can try to do what we can, But literally, if we had the power in Congress and we had a president who was on board, we could put a huge dent in gun violence in the United States, including gun suicides, which is the majority. I forget the exact numbers, but more than half of gun deaths in the United States. And on top of all of this, despite the fact that a lot of mass shootings use these semi automatic military style assault rifles, you're more likely to kill yourself or kill someone else with a handgun. 3/4 of all gun homicides, sorry, 3/4 of all homicides in the United States are gun homicides, and 3/4 of all gun homicides are handgun homicides. We could actually do something about this today. Now, we're not going to. I changed a few years ago. I thought that we could do this, and now I absolutely know we can't, we never will. But it's still technically possible that we could do something about gun violence by actually tackling the issue of guns. We're not going to do anything with mental health in the United States, and that's a problem that they have problems with in France, in the UK, and Germany, where they have national health care. We're not going to be able to do anything. But you know what those other countries do that we could do? They severely restrict guns. So it is the guns. It is the guns. Jesus Christ, it is the guns. But we're not going to do anything about it. The other thing that Dave talked about was, yes, apparently this shooter went through gender transition. I think that's fair to discuss. There's been a lot of critiques of different shooters and whatever they bring to the table. And now that we've had multiple trans shooters, especially when you look at the percentage of the population that identifies as transgender, and then even a smaller percentage of a small percentage that have actually gone through some sort of transition, changed their name. I don't know what the level of transition was on this, if there was a surgery or if there were hormone blockers or injections. All that's being reported that I've seen is that there was a change in the name from a male name to a female name. That's a pretty good indicator of what that means. I think it's fair to discuss that detail. Does it mean that's what drove the person to become a shooter? No, I haven't seen anything like that at all. But when you have a really small group of people that become mass shooters, especially mass shooters that kill children, and we're getting more and more people that represent such a small slice of that delicious cheesecake pie that is, American demographic data, I don't know what the conclusions are, but we should be able to ask that question. Just like we should be able to ask the question of, well, this shooter and many shooters took the guns from their parents. Okay, so shouldn't we have to require a locked gun safe in people's homes if they have guns? That's another question we should be able to ask when you have multiple shooters who took the guns from family members. When you have shooters like the one in Texas at the church many years ago, who was like dishonorably discharged from the military and had a history of like spousal abuse that was documented by the police and should not have been able to buy guns, but was allowed to buy guns because something fell through the cracks. We should be able to ask, well, maybe we need a stronger system, not only to have stronger regulations, but to enforce the regulations that we all seem to agree on at this point. That's another fair question to ask. So I'm not particularly interested in combing through all the shooters and finding out who's trans, because I don't particularly see a connection there. But as long as this data is coming out and it doesn't seem to be made up, which I would say here, it doesn't seem to be made up that this person changed their identity before going through this horrible shooting in Minneapolis and then taking their own life, I think we should be able to ask those questions. Bjorn is over on Stereo. We also have Apostate Nate over on Twitter Spaces. Oh, yes, Bjorn, you're right there.
I just want to pause and say that your quick response to that was one of the best, very concentrated, like rebuttal of guns that I've heard. So I think you quickly summed up all the arguments that we've had these arguments for hours and hours and hours. And I just want to applaud you on that excellent rebuttal.
Well, thank you, Bjorn. Means a lot coming from you. so we didn't particularly talk about this, but what do you think about when people start bringing up, oh, we now have multiple trans shooters? What are they on? What's the connection? What are your thoughts when you hear that?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly there is a predominance of one gender that is committing most of these school shootings, and we all know that it's men. It's not trans people. So, I mean, if you want to point a
Well,
finger
it
at
could
one
never
gender,
be trans people because there's such a small percentage. It doesn't mean that there's not probably an inflated amount of trans shooters.
yeah, there was a Mother Jones article, if you want to Google it, that also had this exact question about is is the and it's clearly it's Mother Jones, very liberal, but it basically had the data up there, and it was just like clearly this is not a trans problem. This is solidly a cisgender problem, if you want to say it that way. But I think that whether a proportion, clearly like I'm guessing there's probably more trans shooters than there are women shooters. That's just a complete guess, but that's my per capita. But I think that if there is mental health problems, clearly that's going to be something that's contributing to it. Clearly there's lots of dudes who don't have good mental health problems. Clearly there's lots of women who don't have mental health problems, who don't have good treatment of mental health problems. But I think that's a big portion of it. But also like there's this machismo around guns and things. Apparently I'm being summoned to go to dinner, so I got to cut short.
Yeah, spend time with your kids while they're home from that expensive private school on the weekend. Great to have you, Bjorn. You can join us back anytime that you'd like. It's always a pleasure to have you, and I appreciate you sharing those personal anecdotes. And thank you very much for that compliment. Yeah, it's something that's like the back of my hand now. It used to be COVID. It used to be I could talk about COVID and the different vaccines, and I could talk about why we shouldn't be afraid of the really good vaccines that use a new technology. And then, most people, including myself, have moved on from COVID. Gun violence, though, this is a thing that we're never, unfortunately, going to be able to move away from in the United States. School shootings in particular, this is going to keep happening. Forget just gun violence outside of school shootings and grocery stores and stuff. This is just going to keep happening because we refuse to adapt. We refuse to look at the data. And so that's why I can just, stream of consciousness, talk about it on my show at the drop of a hat because it's all there. It's not questionable. I guess the only question is whether or not you look at the data. So I appreciate that message from Dave. I appreciate Bjorn. But, I'd love for people to come up on the show, and this has happened before when people said, you know what, Lee, I understand all the data and I just don't care because of this and because of this and because of this. That's honest. And I think it's legitimate in the United States to say, I don't care about mass shootings because it's a small percentage of people, which it is. It's a very small percentage of people. The vast majority of gun owners are responsible. Sure, I can go down that road too. And therefore, because the United States was formed by a bunch of people having guns and killing a bunch of people, this is something I think we should just have in the United States. That's a legitimate answer, as long as you agree that doing something probably just like every other country would have some positive consequences. There are positive consequences by curtailing freedom of speech more than we do in the United States, but there's also negative consequences. And when it comes to freedom of speech, I'm actually erring on the side of no, more is better. But when it comes to guns, no, I err on the side of less is better and more restrictions are better, because say what you want about Alex Jones and all these other terrible people, they're not gunning people down with their words. Alex Jones correctly lost a lawsuit and owed millions upon millions of dollars to parents of the victims of Sandy Hook because he kept lying about it and he was harassing them. But he didn't go to their houses and kill them. That's the difference between the two. And that's why I err on the side of freedom of speech and I do not err on the side of gun rights. But it's the United States. We're never going to change it. So I'm also a bit pragmatic. Dear God, we may have Apostate Nate back with us over on Twitter Spaces. Apostate Nate, are you there?
I'm here, Lee. When you said such and such was never going to happen, you had me thinking. I never thought I would see Roe v. Wade stricken down in my lifetime, if ever. Sometimes the impossible happens.
Yeah, it's a good point. But my quick rebuttal that I'm sure you know what I'm going to say is that the impossible happens if you're a Republican. They don't care about public polling. They don't care about the rule of law. They don't care about anything other than getting what they want. So if Democrats, 40 years ago had decided we need to make sure that abortion is illegal across the United States federally and just throw it to the states, they never would have been successful. Only Republicans could do that. Only Republicans can do the types of things that Trump has accomplished in his first and now his current second term. Now, Trump is a special breed of Republican that I don't think has a twin. I don't think when he's out of the White House, I think Republicans have to reassess and go in a different direction because they're never going to find another Trump. But what makes him so successful in what he tries to accomplish is also the same thing that keeps the Republican Party getting victory after victory. It's the we don't care. We only want what we want. And Democrats, unfortunately, don't have that. I think maybe they're starting to learn from Republicans, and the shaming of them losing so often is starting to affect them, but they're never going to have what the Republicans have, unfortunately. So that's my rebuttal to you, Apostate Nate. Let's jump back over here on stereo. Got a new message from Tree of Life. Take it away.
It's that age-old argument that you get for the people that believe that we shouldn't have guns. For those people, the age-old argument to that is, okay, so the only people that have guns at this point are the police. Now you're outgunned, you're outnumbered, you're out everything because they're the only ones that have weapons and you don't. So I always on the side of guns. I think the way people have gone about it as far as trying to limit guns and gun restrictions has not only worked, but is just being a complete dick to gun owners that actually are responsible with guns. And most people that go and do these things that restrict them, they don't even own guns to begin with. They don't know what a restriction is. They think if they can just take away some part of the gun or a little bit of the ammo, that's going to change. Like that's not it at all.
Thank you for the message, Tree of Life. Feel free to leave us some more messages. So let's tackle the first thing, and I might forget some of your points. Only police have guns, then you're screwed. I mean, that's every other country, basically, aside from Canada. Canada has more guns than people. You can argue their geography and similar culture is the reason for that. So if we just take Canada out and we take the United States out, every other country in the developed world is exactly as you've described. Most guns are in the military's hands, police officers' hands. It's a little different from country to country. Some countries, you really have no guns at all. Other countries, you have some guns. Have you been to those countries? They're wonderful. You would be much better off living there than you are in the United States unless you're filthy rich. The data shows that. I mean, my personal experience of traveling shows that as well, but the data's there. So you don't need to be afraid of police and military having guns because it works in every other country outside of the US and Canada. So that's number one. Number two, you make an interesting point. A lot of people that want to get rid of guns are not gun owners. I don't think it's as much as you have made out to be, but yes, if you look across the United States and people who favor stricter gun regulations versus keeping it the way we have now, or even lightening it up a bit and making guns more available to people than they already are in the one outlier country in the world other than Canada, when we talk about the developed world, yes, you would see more likely the people who want less gun restrictions have guns, people who want more gun restrictions don't have guns. But there's definitely a middle ground there. And then so your related point about, oh, they think they can do this and that'll affect it, or they think they can do this and that'll affect it, but it won't. There's some truth in that. You take away assault rifles, and people can just walk in with shotguns and handguns and still kill a lot of people. In fact, some mass shooters only use shotguns and handguns. But if you stop people from selling guns and buying new guns, we don't have to talk about clip size and, oh, you can't use this kind of stock or you can't use a bump stock, because they're missing the most important part, the gun itself. So I think you have some points here, but overall, to rely on them, I don't think works. The data doesn't support it. If you go to France, the discussion is not about clip size, it's not about bump stocks, it's about having a gun in the first place. So you don't have to be a genius to figure out how to stop gun violence so that it's at the levels of basically every other developed nation, including Canada. They have less gun violence than we do, even though they have more guns than people, like we do, but we have even more guns than Canada does per capita. So I encourage you to think a little bit outside of what we just heard. Leave me some more messages. Tell me where you think I'm wrong. But I mean, this is data. It's not rocket science. It's not brain surgery. This is very clearly, we are different than every other country, even different than Canada. They have less gun violence, even though they have per capita more guns than people, just like we do. We're just number one. America's number one, everybody. Number one at one thing or another. We often are the outlier. Really quickly, let's ask fake President Donald Trump. We just had another school shooting. This time it was at a Catholic church and Catholic school. Should we get rid of guns, Mr. President, in the United States to protect children? What do you think?
That's a tough question. I believe that guns can be a useful tool when it comes to self-defense, but they should never be used to harm others. We need to do more to prevent gun violence and keep our children safe. We should look into ways to make it harder for people to obtain firearms, and we should also focus on mental health issues and other root causes of violence.
Wow, so strong, Mr. Trump. So strong. Fake President Trump. Bjorn posted over on my Discord server, it's also International Overdose Awareness Day. My lawn is covered in purple balloons and these little flags. Interesting. I haven't seen those. I didn't know that was a thing. Now, they have a day of this or a day of that. Sometimes it's different from country to country. Sometimes it's international. It's not a real day. It's not federally recognized. Most of them. Some of them, I think they get a proclamation every once in a while, but certainly you don't get like a day off. All right. Well, thanks for the little tidbit of information, Bjorn. Let's stop those overdoses. Or do we double down and say we want to be the overdose capital, just like we are with gun violence in the developed world? We like being first. Let's jump over to stereo. Apostate Nate, I see you're back as a speaker. Just go ahead and raise your hand whenever you want to jump in. Let's hear from Dave again over on stereo.
Yeah, Bjorn, I think you hit the nail on the head as far as what the problem is with the funding of our schools. It shouldn't be tied to property taxes, because then nice neighborhoods, nice areas have nice schools. And then people leave other areas and go to those areas. And then what's left behind? A bad school with people who can't afford to do anything about it. So I think that is the crux, right? That we fund our schooling in the wrong way.
So yeah, Dave, you'll get no argument from me, but it's the United States. How else are we going to do it? Even Democrats don't want to fund public education to the level that we would need in the United States to give everyone a good public education. I mean, this is what it's like being a Democrat, is that the only party that mostly shares my values is not really that liberal compared to the rest of the developed world. So the Democrats are going to do it more than the Republicans, or maybe you could also say the Democrats are going to take less money away from education than the Republicans, because that kind of feels like that's just the trend we're on. And the Republicans are certainly not going to do it. So then you have the pragmatic approach. Well, how do you fund education? Well, fund it from the citizens that live in the area, hence property taxes or a sales tax or something like that. It's not ideal, but isn't it better than just relying on the low amount of public funding that we're going to get? So I would just say what's the better realistic option? I don't see one. Maybe you can come up with one. Leave a message and let me know. Let's jump back over to stereo. This is Tree of Life again.
So I am a citizen of Canada, and I'm a citizen of the United States. The only reason to have guns in Canada is to go sport shooting or hunting. You can't use it to defend your household. You can't do it or anything other than that. You have to take a class. The class just teaches you about guns and the basics of what you can and cannot do. In the United States, you're right. You can get a gun as low as 18 in some states and 21 in others. Just kind of depends. My issue is and I'd like to hear this from you. What is an assault weapon? Can you define an assault weapon for me, please? And then we can have a conversation on this.
Great question. Thank you. I'll get to that. So assault weapon actually has a definition. A lot of people disagree with it, but when you look at how it's handled by the government and stuff, there is a definition that's not 100% black and white. There's a little bit of gray, but there definitely is a definition. And then there's that definition. And then there's also what other people just colloquially talking would call an assault weapon. And those are probably different. But yes, let's get to that in a bit. Really quickly, let's catch up on a few things that Bjorn mentioned. So this is that Mother Jones article that he talked about before he had to go to dinner with his family. This is very recent. It's from August 28th on motherjones.com. Title: Mass shooters are not disproportionately transgender. The suspect in the mass shooting responsible for killing 2 school-aged children, I believe they were 8 and 10, and wounding 17 others at a Catholic church this says church, I believe it was also a school, in Minneapolis on Wednesday, has been identified as having changed her legal name in 2020 to reflect her identity as a female. Predictably, voices on the far right. Now, I'm not a voice on the far right, and I'm talking about this, so have immediately seized on that tidbit, blaming the suspect's gender identity for the shooting. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene posted on X, today's evil church school shooter was a trans who was likely groomed and transitioned as a teenager. Congress must pass my bill protecting children's Innocence Act to make it a felony to perform sex change surgeries and all forms of medications on minors. Just one day after the horrific event, it isn't yet possible to conclude why the suspected killer chose to do what she did. But what we can say is that despite the probable identity of yesterday's attacker, there is no evidence that transgender people are more likely to commit mass shootings. Rather, multiple independent databases tracking mass shootings confirm the opposite. The Gun Violence Archive, which tracks shootings in which 4 or more people, not including the shooter, are shot and killed, estimated last year that fewer than 1% of shootings it reviewed in the last decade were carried out by trans individuals. Mother Jones has its own database tracking shootings in which 3 or more victims were killed in an indiscriminate public rampage. And as this journalist wrote in 2023, very, very few of those were carried out by individuals who were not cisgender men. That doesn't, I'm jumping around. That doesn't mean transgender people are never responsible for these acts. There are, unfortunately, many preventable deaths caused by gun violence in the U.S. Trans people make up a very small proportion of the U.S. population, and they make up a similarly small proportion of gun violence perpetrators. But to blame the unnerving prevalence of mass shootings in America on the existence of trans people here isn't just a dangerously stigmatizing, politically motivated take, it's also bad math. So I have a few problems with this. First off, they talk about most shootings are carried out by cisgender males. That's not how those people identify themselves. So again, on the left, we will tell people, oh, however you identify, you should be respected, and that's how you should be pointed to and spoken to, unless you're a man. who was born a man and identifies as a man to the point that you don't even think about, I have to identify as a man, that's just who you are, those people are not cisgender males. So that's completely incorrect. And that's a huge point of hypocrisy from the left. So I just want to point that out. The second thing here is that they mention in the last 10 years, looking at school shooters and their gender identities. I would argue that in the last 10 years, there has been such a huge shift to people publicly identifying however they want to identify, to the point that I think it's gone overboard. And this is one of the reasons Democrats have lost elections, that you really have to look at the last couple of years rather than the last 10 years. It would be like, well, we looked at school shootings from the last 70 years and there was a very low percentage of trans shoot. Well, of course, because the further back in time you go, the less likely people are going to be out in that way, identifying publicly in that way. So I question the timeline that they're using data. But I do not disagree that trans people are a very small proportion of the population, and they're a very small proportion of mass shooters. That clearly is the case. But in the last couple of years, since we've now had multiple trans shooters, and especially the one previously, this one we don't know as much about, but I feel like the one previously had a lot more connection to the identity of the shooter and why the shooting happened. Maybe we'll see that in this case as well. Time will tell. It's not inappropriate to ask questions now that we have this data. Now, I don't agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene's posts on X, but the idea that just bringing it up is not only dangerous, but bad math, I don't think that necessarily is an objective statement. It's such small numbers now, you really could throw it out any way that you want. But if I had to make a prediction, in the next 10 years, we're going to have, if you actually boil down the evidence, some pretty convincing truth that there may be a connection to being trans and a higher likelihood of engaging in a mass shooting. With such small numbers, that likelihood might also be very, very, very small. That would be my guess. But it's a likelihood I think the data will point us to in the next 10 years. Nevertheless, I'm off my soapbox. It is News Debate. I'm Lee. If you like the show, support the program over on patreon.com/NEWZ Debate. It looks like Apostate Nate is still with us over on Twitter Spaces. You're having some difficulty because Elon Musk is terrible today. So if you can't raise your hand, if you want to jump in, just go ahead and unmute yourself and start talking. We'd love to hear more from you. Now, let's go over to ChatGPT and get some of this information on assault weapons. And then I will share my screen over on Twitch and Rumble. So in the US, assault weapon doesn't have one single universal legal definition. It depends on federal versus state law. Here's a breakdown. At the federal level, there's no current federal definition. The 1994-2004 federal assault weapons ban expired, but it defined assault weapons mainly as semi-automatic firearms that could accept a detachable magazine, plus had certain military-style features like a folding or telescoping stock, a pistol grip, a bayonet mount, flash suppressor or threaded barrel, and a grenade launcher. That expired in 2004, and Congress hasn't reinstated it. So right now at the federal level, assault weapon has no legal meaning. But the precedent at the federal level is there. I just read it. Then at the state level, several states like California, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and some more have their own assault weapon bans with similar but slightly different definitions. Generally, they classify an assault weapon as a semi-automatic rifle, pistol, or shotgun with a detachable magazine and at least one or two military-style features like a folding stock, pistol grip, flash suppressor, etc. Some states also ban specific models by name, like the AR-15, the AK-47, or the Uzi. Outside of laws, the term assault weapon is often used loosely in public debate, usually referring to AR 15 style rifles and similar guns. Gun rights advocates argue the term is a political label, not a technical category. If that is what someone is arguing, they are absolutely incorrect. It's a technical category plus category, depending on what time in the United States it is. If it's back in 2002, then yeah, it's a federal category. If you're in a state right now that has that legislation, it's a category. It's categories with an S. And they're all very similar. They're all very similar, pointing to the same style gun. So the bottom line, legally, assault weapon only means something if you're in a state with its own ban. Federally, it's an expired definition and a political buzzword today. So I was asked about that, and that is the answer. Now, we've been doing the show for about an hour and 15 minutes. Let's jump on to a few stories that I had prepared. This one is one of those stories that when I saw it, I just thought, this is awesome. It it pulls so many things together and is a true story of our time. Let me share this with you. I want to hear what you think about this apostate Nate over on Twitter Spaces. So this is from CNN. The Border Patrol arrested 2 crew workers helping battle Washington State's biggest wildfire for being in the country illegally. This happened on Wednesday. Lawyers for one of the men dispute that characterization, alleging he was already on track for legal status. Sounds like he wasn't legal at the time. The Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service had requested support from a local Border Patrol station as the agencies terminated work contracts with 2 firms on the Olympic Peninsula. Without offering details, the agency says the contracts were ended following the conclusion of a criminal investigation by the Bureau of Land Management. The 2 contracted workers arrested were there in a support role, cutting logs into firewood. So they actually weren't fighting this story makes it sound like they're out there with gear, spraying water and stuff. Okay, they were part of that, but they weren't doing that. Thanks, CNN. Department of Health, DHS, is that Department of Homeland Security said in an updated statement on Friday that the firefighting response remained uninterrupted the entire time despite the arrests. A longtime Oregon resident was one of the 2 arrested. The man has lived in the U.S. for 19 years after arriving with his family at the age of 4, according to his attorneys. He reportedly had been waiting since 2018 for immigration agencies to decide on his visa application, which protects victims of serious crimes who assist federal investigators. The lawyer for one of the men says they were protected by Department of Homeland Security policy barring immigration enforcement in emergency response areas, but DHS has previously said that he and the other man arrested were only in a supporting role. I think that's fair. They were just cutting wood. They were cutting logs into firewood. So that's definitely the definition of a supporting role. Anything else here worth mentioning? Under the previous Biden administration, the Department of Homeland Security said it would not conduct immigration enforcement at locations where disaster and emergency response and relief is being provided. All right, that's it. So, Apostate Nate, I think you're with us right now as a speaker. Do you have any thoughts on this? I got a hot take on this. What do you think?
I'm not. Um, I think you're gonna have to go first. I don't know, Wiley. I just cannot get my brain to think a thought right now. Um, give me
Well, you've been
give me
battling the
first.
wildfire that is known as Twitter Spaces. So I know your mind's been in and out of the gutter trying to figure out how to get your mic to turn on. So I'll start this little shindig. I am fine with this. If they were fighting the fire with gear and were in like a dangerous situation, I would think differently. I would say they shouldn't have gone in at that time. I think it put people's lives in danger, and it sends the wrong message. But since they were chopping logs into firewood, no one seems to disagree with that fact. They were in the country illegally. One person was waiting for more information on his visa application. You know, if you apply for school, it doesn't mean you're accepted. So in this instance, I'm totally fine with this. The optics look bad, especially when the CNN article is titled Border Patrol arrests 2 crew workers helping battle Washington's biggest wildfire for being in the country illegally. That's not accurate. So, you know, the headlines make this look worse than it actually is. But from what we understand happened, we don't know about the other guy. This one guy came in when he was 4, and he's been waiting since 2018. Apparently, we don't know that for a fact. That's what I think his lawyer said. To get a response on his visa application, that does not mean his visa has been accepted. So I am fine with this. Any pushback, Nate?
Not really, Lee. And you've just reminded me again that CNN, like so many other, trusted and popular news outlets, it really does its viewers a disservice, its readers a disservice, with headlines that aren't quite true. Um, Problem with headlines is they have to be strong and punchy, and things that are a little bit more nuanced, they're not quite as sexy to make a headline out of, right? So it's a business, Lee.
Another headline I saw recently, I'm sure CNN was one of the offenders, but I don't recall offhand, was that Donald Trump terminated the Secret Service protection for former Vice President Kamala Harris. And at first I thought, oh, that sounds like something Donald Trump would do. But just a very casual reading past the headline, it turns out that's not exactly what happened. President Biden extended her Secret Service protection, and Trump canceled that extension. She received the full 6 months that vice presidents are supposed to receive, but she was receiving extra protection. And from what I was able to gather, there was no specific reason why that was added. It just was by President Biden before she was even the ex vice president. So it's really funny because I was paying attention to that story over maybe 24 hours, and I saw that after a few hours, however long it was, some of the headlines actually changed to indicate that he canceled her extension. Like maybe even some liberal people working at that news organization decided, hey, this is kind of dishonest. So yeah, this is the unfortunate truth. I think Donald Trump's a terrible person, and there's more than enough reasons to point to that fact. I'll throw it out there. Point to that fact. But at the same time, I think he's been misrepresented by the media, which is enormously liberal overall, more than any other president in our lifetime. Because when he does something that seems pretty clear cut, you can disagree with it, but it seems pretty clear cut. Like, why did she need extra protection? And he just ended that protection. It's misrepresented by news media, which is once again enormously liberal. And so this is why I'm for the defunding of NPR, much less for public broadcasting, PBS, but definitely NPR, because they have a crazy bias, just like almost every other major news outlet. If you throw Fox News out of the mix, it's pretty much all of them. Now we have some Newsmax, we have some startups that have made it a little bit more varied, but still, and especially if you go back 5 years, if you throw Fox News out, they're all very, very liberal. And I don't think that does anyone any favors, because it just gives ammo to people who say, oh, Trump is misrepresented, because he is. You don't have to make stuff up. You don't have to lie with headlines to be able to effectively, to be able to rightfully criticize President Trump. I say, well, maybe not effectively, because this is the problem with Republicans nowadays. Forget the MAGA loyalists, just Republicans nowadays. They don't care about facts. So not only is it dishonest the way that a lot of reporting plays out regarding President Trump, I don't know that it helps. I don't know that it's convincing people who otherwise like him. The people who already don't like them don't need convincing. There's more than enough evidence about how of a shitty person he is. But his individual policies, his individual actions can be really removed from the shitty person that he is. And I just wish that news media had a backbone and would do that. But once again, just like gun restrictions in the United States, I don't assume that's going to happen anytime soon. And then finally, this one was really interesting. Better Vibes, friend of the show, and patreon.com/NEWZ debate supporter Better Vibes. I thought he was going to be able to make today's show. He and I were in agreement. I posted this story over on my Discord server. Join the Discord by going to bit.ly/NEWZ debate. This is from CNN. Or rather, this is from the New York Times. President Trump says he's going to sign an executive order mandating voter ID. Now, this is a made-up problem that Republicans always talk about. It's not a real problem. But at the same time, anyone who's against you have to have ID to be able to vote, you got to give me a single reason why that's a bad idea other than some people don't have ID. Something as important as voting, and something that has such big consequences as voting, and is supposed to be so transparent and supposed to be so secure, to sit back and say people don't need to have a photo ID to be able to vote, I just don't see how you can defend that position. It doesn't mean that if we don't institute it, voting is not legitimate. But why not make it more legitimate? Why not remove this Republican lie that, results cannot be trusted because you don't need an ID? If every place in the next few years required a physical ID to be able to vote, they can't complain about that. Again, this is not a huge deal, but it's just, these small fixes that the Democrats are against, that liberal people are against. Give me a reason why. I understand some people, maybe many people won't be able to vote, but I don't care. As an adult, you need to have an ID. It's not ridiculous to say that you need to have a physical ID as an adult. I can't imagine someone not having a physical ID. I know there are probably millions of people who do not, but this seems like something that's important and is a good move. And if people really want to vote, they can get an ID. And maybe we can have exceptions for people that have very, very difficult physical handicaps, right? Sorry, that's 2025. Very, very difficult enabling features that are no different or better or worse than my own, that sort of thing. However you need to say it, it just makes perfect sense to me. Apostate Nate, do you have a thought on this?
I think the common objection to voter ID, Lee, has something to do with the idea of the disenfranchised voter who doesn't have the resources ostensibly to go out and get one. For my money, I don't think it would be insane to require voter ID. I mean, you have to be able to show ID to buy tobacco when you're visibly older than the age, at which you can, can finally do so. I would say this: let's just not give up. I mean, maybe there are ways we can subsidize transportation to and from, photo centers. I don't know. Subsidize or eliminate the cost for getting the voter ID or getting it renewed for people at certain income levels. I I would be okay with a voter ID system as long as there were ample resources for everyone to get one. Like, in other words, if you didn't get one, it's because at that point you didn't want one. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's reasonable. I don't know what the ID regulations are now. I know every time I have to get a new ID or a new passport or something, it's a huge pain in the neck. It's probably even worse right now in many areas, especially for the passport because that's federal. Um, but I feel like even if we got to that point, people would still, no one's going to change their mind. I think the most people who are against this would just say we're against this, and they would point to disenfranchisement as the reason. Now, once again, it is the United States, so I don't pretend for, and I know you're just throwing out an idea, but I don't pretend for a moment that we're going to be able to do all the things that you just mentioned. But even if we did, I don't think it's going to change a lot of people's minds. Now, what's interesting here is that this is where I disagree. This is where my agreement, I should say, with President Trump ends. So let's read from the New York Times. President Trump said late Saturday that he would issue an executive order to require voter identification for all U.S. elections, a continuation of his efforts to overhaul the nation's election laws, which he has long attacked and falsely blamed for his 2020 election loss. He has also reiterated his intention to restrict mail in voting, except for those who are very ill or serving far away in the military, as well as his opposition to voting machines. So, those are two things I disagree with him. Mail in voting is awesome and it should be expanded. There's nothing constitutionally that says you have to vote in person, from what I've ever seen. And also voting machines. Sure, we have found some issues with voting machines, but does anyone really want to go back to fully paper ballots? I mean, that makes no, once again, it makes perfect sense to me that you have to have an ID to vote, and it makes no sense to me that you can't do it electronically like everything else is done electronically. If you can file your taxes electronically, which I've done for years and years and years, you can vote electronically. And absentee voting, I mean, that's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Who's against that? Now, getting rid of absentee voting, I think it is true that they're trying to do that because I think if you look at absentee votes, they skew more liberal. So, I'm not kissing Trump's butt here. I mean, things that make sense, I'm for, and things that don't make sense, I'm against. Nate, you're for electronic voting machines and absentee voting, right? Don't those things make sense?
I think I think you have to have some sort of absentee system. As to the other concern, it is 2025. We are living in the information age. We are living in practically the transhuman age with computers. We should keep up with the times by storing and logging our most important data with the best technology. That is my opinion.
And it makes sense. Why would I be against that? This is what I would love: newspapers,
Lee, I
news
agree with you on this.
stations,
But like,
whatever. Yeah, continue.
no, sorry, I just wanted to say that how much I agree with you on this being a weird issue for the left. Because it's a pressure point that I think makes the left look really, really bad. Because like you, it's hard for me to think, well, yeah, I mean, I have to I have to show ID to buy a lottery ticket too. You know what I mean? Or whatever the state's policies are, the store's policies. It's just hard for me to I don't it just doesn't sound like a terrible idea. Provided that there are enough resources for those who do not have the ability to travel or pay those renewal fees like people pay for the renewal, say, of a license plate on a car. I think reasonable access and provisions, and that can be made. We've put people on the moon. We flew a stealth bomber over the head of two idiots to make a statement. We can do better with our money, Lee.
And again, to look at other countries, other developed nations, I don't think I've ever seen anything. I thought I looked this up one time on a previous show that showed any other advanced nation had outlawed voting machines or outlawed um, absentee voting. I think there was something with Ireland that you couldn't vote if you were abroad or something like that. So maybe there's a weird outlier here and there, but generally, if you just look across advanced nations, like I was saying with gun rights, almost nowhere else outside of the US and Canada do you have any kind of gun rights like we have. And as we heard from a listener over on stereo, I can't confirm this, but he was saying that in Canada, you basically can just use them for hunting. So they don't even have the same gun rights that we have, even though they have more guns than people like we do, but we have way more guns than people compared to Canada. So if you look across the board, we're missing health care. We have too many gun rights. I guess you could argue we have too much freedom of speech, but that's something I'm for, so I'm not arguing that right now. And our voting system sucks. You know, some countries have a national day off when they hold votes. You know, I think I've mentioned this on the show before. If we want to get rid of voting machines and we want to get rid of absentee ballots, okay, I, I I'm interested in that discussion as long as we have a federal holiday for elections. Because then that really gets to the people who cannot go because of some physical thing. And then we have an exception for them. And especially like extended in-person voting. Some places will have in-person voting the day, previous to the day of the election. If we're going to say, oh, it has to be in person and we can't have electronic voting machines, okay, I'm interested in having that discussion, but then you get to vote like 3 or 4 days before the election in person. And then if you can't show up, the only way you can get an exception is, once again, for those issues that we were discussing. That's reasonable discussion of this news item. I don't see that anywhere. I don't hear that from Democrats, but that's what I would love to hear. Nate, I might start up. Or I'm sorry, continue, Boss Nate.
We can provide those resources. Okay, that's a doable thing to make it somebody's job to make sure that the destitutes and the resourceless are able to vote. I believe that can happen. I believe people in those categories can, in fact, receive voter identification.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to tackle this. You have to have a physical ID to vote, but you can vote up to 3 days before the election. And we don't have electronic machines. Okay, I would take that deal. Plus the caveats you discussed about, okay, people who are like on public benefits, hey, if you're on public assistance, you don't have to pay for your ID. Maybe we're not going to give you a passport, but you can get a state ID with that star. Like, that's a good compromise. Once again, voter fraud is not a real problem. It's so insubstantial that it doesn't really even matter. But it's not ridiculous to say that, well, let's make it even more secure than it is already. But there's got to be something else. So this is why I'm against overall. President Trump wants to get rid of absentee voting, wants to get rid of electronic voting machines, and wants to make you have an ID to vote. I'll take one of those three and give me a federal holiday. It's not going to happen, but give me a federal holiday. Give me 3 or more days before the election to vote in person. And yeah. Now, it is nice. He does have the caveat. He wants to restrict mail-in voting except for those who are very, very ill or serving far away in the military. What about expats, people living in France, people living in South Africa who are American citizens? If memory serves, Ireland does some sort of thing like this where you can't vote unless you're in Ireland, and if not Ireland, some other country, but I thought it was Ireland. That I'm definitely against. So there has to be an exception for people living outside of the country. Now, if you're traveling outside of the country during the election, maybe we just go ahead and say that's your fault. But if you're actually living somewhere, there has to be an exception. And that should be mail or electronic, because you can be living in a country and maybe there's an embassy plus a consulate, but it might not be anywhere near you. You don't need to travel 5 hours to cast your vote, because I wouldn't do that. No matter the election, I wouldn't travel 5 hours, probably wouldn't even travel 2 hours. So this is the sort of criticism I'd like to see from the left, rather than, oh, we just can't have voter ID. I don't know that this sort of discussion is going to do any good for people who are just full on Trump supporters. I don't know that's going to convince everybody, but at least it doesn't make it as terrible as it is for everybody else. I don't like Trump, but I don't like to see misleading headlines. I don't like Trump, but I don't like to see Democrats, liberals, insert term here, who won't even give him a moment for things that seem reasonable. That's just dishonest. You're not being realistic. Okay, I think I might wrap things up. We're a little short of 2 hours, which is usually my goal for each show, but we had a really, 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 really good discussion on several topics on today's program. Apostate Nate, let's give you a final thought and anything else you want to throw out.
I think today, Lee, what you've reminded me of is that it's important for people on both sides of the political it's important for people on both sides of the political aisle to stop really playing team sports. And one proof that you can do that is to, as much as needed, is to give a word of praise to your political adversary. There are just so many people rabidly angry about everything that if Trump does something right, there's simply going to be no credit. And I I see no merit in that approach. I think it's important that credit is given when it's due, even if you don't like him. I think he's a horrific person. He's a horrific person who also signed the Right to Try Act during his first term, and I still give him credit for signing that because I think it makes sense to allow dying patients to throw a Hail Mary pass as they are seeming to be near their end, and he put that in play. I consider myself to be an adult most days of the week. Um, and I think it's important that I'm able to look at my political adversary and say that's something that they did, that this was a good thing. Um, so I think what today's conversation has reminded me of, because you were tapping into, like, let's talk about some of the reasonable, ideas that Trump has. It speaks to the toxic nature of the discourse and how afraid people are of each other, that they can't credit their political opponent with a good policy that could really be beneficial. to others, and that's putting your own political team sports over people, and I think that's disgusting. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Well said as always, Apostate Inc. Glad we can get you back on the show after Elon Musk was effing with us. Twitter Spaces is such a shit show now. It's unfortunate. It could be the premier social audio space. It could be the premier social audio platform, and it was for a while. I don't know what it would be now, but it's just like it's hard to give that crown to Twitter Spaces when it's so buggy. Really quickly before we go, I know you're listening over on Twitter Spaces, but over on the Rumble stream and the Twitch stream, go to bit.ly/NEWZ debate for those links. This is Bjorn's homemade cheesecake. He posted the picture over in my Discord server. Join Discord by going to bit.ly/NEWZ debate. It's looking pretty nice. It's got that, doesn't look like a perfect cookie that you would buy in a bag, a package full of a bunch of other perfect cookies. It has that, ooh, I bet that's tasty because it doesn't look perfect look. And then also, this was the flag he said he had in his yard because today's International Overdose Awareness Day. It is an interesting looking design. You'll have to check it out for yourself on my Rumble and Twitch stream, or just type that into Google, and I'm sure you will be able to find it. Big thanks today to Apostate Nate and Bjorn, as well as my other supporters over on patreon.com/NEWZ debates. Hope to have another show sometime soon. I like changing the times and finding the ones that are the best for everybody. So I'll keep switching that up. If you have a time that you want to do a show, send me a message wherever you can find me. That's going to do it. Take care, everybody, and have a good rest of your week. Bye-bye.